This video was made in sponsorship with Hear Well, Be Well Clinics. Compassionate, trustworthy, and innovative. Check them out. Hi, Emily. Thank you so much for joining me on an episode of Hear Me Out. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me, April.
Yay, I'm so glad you're here. Okay, so I like to start all my guests off with the question, what is your connection to hearing loss?
Absolutely. So, when I was 27, I realized that I could no longer talk on the phone on one side. I couldn't understand what was being said. And at first I thought like, oh, I've had a cold and this and that. But eventually I did tell my doctor and he's like, we better do a hearing test. And I found out at that time that I had a severe hearing loss in my left ear. So that prompted a series of appointments and tests. And long story short, I found out that I had an acoustic neuroma or a vestibular schwannoma, which is a benign brain tumor that grows on your balance nerve and impacts your hearing. So at that point, I had the severe hearing loss, and then I had to pick treatment for the brain tumor, which ended up being brain surgery within a few months. And as a result of that surgery, I became deaf in my left ear. So I lost all the hearing then. And so that was a few years back now. And since that time, I have become very active volunteering with the Acoustic Neuroma Association, both as a peer mentor and a support group leader. I've created a community for young adults who have the same diagnosis. And I've also become a hearing loss advocate. I do a lot of writing. I do some writing for the Hearing Loss Association of America and some other organizations. And I'm also a blogger.
That's amazing. Well, that's phenomenal. And I'll make sure to include all of that in the caption so people can find you because support groups are so important. And I can't stress that enough. I'm in a bunch myself. It's honestly one of the best things that have helped my journey. So thank you for creating those. That's amazing. Um, so you, similarly to me, began to lose your hearing. You said 27. How did you like initially navigate that? Because I can only imagine like you had a few different diagnoses. You got like the hearing loss and then the brain tumor. So that's just a lot kind of wrapped up in one. How did you navigate all that?
Yeah, it is. It's a lot to navigate. And it's funny because um I, like a lot of people who have that diagnosis, you don't almost handle the hearing loss until a little ways down the road because there's so many dire things happening with something like a brain tumor diagnosis. It's a lot going on. So I do find for me that I get into like a survival mode, right? It's like, okay, I gotta find out this information. I gotta make this next decision. I've gotta, just put one foot in front of the other to like get through it. So another thing that's really impacted too with this diagnosis is balance. And so that was another really big piece, especially in the initial recovery right after surgery. It all works together. So yeah, working on the hearing loss specifically, that was a little later. I was probably about 6 months after my brain surgery that I really started, yeah, about 5 months, I think I started going to appointments and things to research my options. And it was funny because I had severe hearing loss before I had the brain tumor removed. And so I thought, oh, well, going from 90% of my hearing gone to 100%, like that's not going to be that different. But it actually was like more different than I thought, just not hearing anything on that side, like not hearing the traffic, not realizing someone walked up on that side. Like you have a deaf cone kind of when you have one deaf ear that if anything happens at all in that space, you don't know. And losing that was more dramatic than I thought. And so I think that it took me a little bit to wrap my mind around what I needed, what the problems were, and then go looking for the solutions. Luckily, I'm the kind of person who's very comfortable with research and like finding things out and advocating for myself. And even though that the advocacy part takes a lot of practice and a lot of time to get good at, and so I decided to look into options and I chose to get a bone anchored hearing aid, which
Okay.
was a wonderful thing for me. It's really improved my life. I love it. It makes such a difference as a mom, as a business owner. I mean, everything. It really impacts my life in a positive way. And I think that besides the help with hearing, it was so empowering to feel disabled and be like, I can do something to make my life better. I can take where I am and get to a better place than that. And so I think that was maybe the best part of the whole thing was that I had things I could do to help myself.
That's amazing. That is so empowering to hear. And I think a lot of people get stuck in kind of like a downward spiral that it might be hard to kind of navigate their way to a point where you're at. And I think that's so beautiful that you've taken your experience and created all of these wonderful things to help people. And I think that that's inspiring. And I think a lot more people hope to aspire to do, but it's sometimes really hard to speak up. Like you said, advocating takes a lot of practice. And I mean, I do it all the time, but there's still some situations where I'm like, it's like hard to find your voice, but then you keep doing it, it gets easier. So that's amazing that you've taken that upon yourself. Um, and you've mentioned a few different things that you're doing and that you own a business. Can you dive into that a little bit? Because I know that a lot of people in the hearing loss community struggle to find work, struggle to kind of find their place in, employment. So can you kind of shed a little light on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I happen to be third generation in my family to own and operate this business, which happens to be campgrounds. So my grandparents and my dad started it in the late 60s, early 70s. And I run it currently with my brother and sister. It's both wonderful and also really hard running a business with hearing loss. On the one, and so to a certain extent, you can do it the way you want to do it. The flip side is that like the buck stops with you. And so, somebody calls in sick, suddenly I'm working a 12-hour shift, or I'm covering an area that's loud or. So while I try to do accommodations, which accommodations are so hard. It's hard to know what will help you. It's hard to know what's out there. And I think in general, when you're looking for accommodations in the workplace, it's really important that you actually figure it out yourself, which is just so hard. Like you wish that you had someone who could come in and be like, this is what you need, but you have to do all of that legwork of figuring it out yourself. And so I try and do that. I'm fortunate that I can implement a lot of that. But there's always things that are like the nature of the business that I can't get around. It's a very customer service heavy business. And I'm interacting with a lot of different people. When I'm out in the office, I've got all the different staff, I've got all the different customers, I've got all the machines. Like there's a lot of background noise. It is very, very fatiguing. And so for me, the biggest thing has been, finding those different ways you can change things. For example, all of our customer stations were set up so that the customer stood on my deaf side. And
Oh,
so when we did a remodel, I was like, okay, so we're changing that so that everybody is on my hearing side. Or different things like having a quiet space you can go to. I can't always work in the quiet area for extended periods, but maybe I could
right.
take like 5 minutes. And even 5 minutes makes like a humongous difference on my ability to get through the day. Um, I also try to remember how fatiguing work is going to be. And so, like, if I know it's going to be a long day, I plan not a lot of listening after work, to just sort of budget my listening energy more or less.
I
And
like that.
yeah, and for the most part, I'm able to do it. It takes some flexibility and some creativity, which really is an important piece. You can't like be stuck that this is how you do it, right? Like, where do I want to be? Okay, what are the different avenues that I can get there? Because there is more than one way to get things done. And sometimes if you just are willing to not do it the same way you've always done it, you can still get there. So I try to do that to adjust things. And then we just see how it all ends up. I was at a really great workshop about accommodations in the workplace for hearing loss, and they said, and sometimes you might just need to change your career. I don't feel like I really have that option as third generation. I don't feel like I can change, but instead I look at how I can alter my workplace situation to fit my needs. The other thing that's quite challenging as the owner is you really feel that pressure to get everything perfectly right because you're not just
Mm.
like a lineman staff where you can make mistakes and people are like, oh, people make mistakes. You're the owner. They're like, I'm expecting it to be like exactly right. So I try to do the best I can, and I also try and communicate my hearing loss needs when I can. I will let customers know that I interact with in the long term, hey, I have a hearing loss, and sometimes it's hard for me, or I will like let them know in the moment, I'm sorry, I'm struggling to hear you right now. And I also will sometimes wear my hair up for work so that my hearing device is more visible because currently it isn't. And I have found that that can be a really awesome place to advocate and connect with other people with hearing loss. I've had people tell me, "Oh, you have a bone anchored hearing aid? I have one too, and I've never met someone in person." Or I had someone come up to me and he said, "My daughter has cochlear implants and she's a teenager and she's really uncomfortable about them. And seeing you show off your hearing device at work has made her feel so much better." And like to have that opportunity because of work is amazing. And I love it so much.
Oh, I love that too. And you brought up a really good point about finding the accommodations that you need in the workplace and providing them to your employer. And I think that's a really hard pill to swallow for some people because it goes with the advocating for yourself and not to like single anyone out or point fingers, but it's really easy to fall into like the victim mindset and being like, well, they're not willing to help me, this and that. It's like, great, but have you helped yourself yet? Like, have you figured out the exact things that are going to help you? And then you just give, like, hey, this is what I need. If they can't provide it for you, you probably don't want to work for them anyway, right? Like, if they're not willing to do something so simple, like, I think that's a really great point that you brought up. You know, you have to be prepared. You have to
Yeah,
figure
and
those situations out.
it's really hard to know, but everyone's hearing loss is so different. And something that
Yeah,
helps me may not help you. And even
right.
like someone like me who has single-sided deafness, everybody's experience of that is so different. And so you can have the exact same audiogram and experience your hearing loss totally differently. And so unfortunately, it really does fall to you because nobody else knows what your experience is like. And so even though that's daunting, if you can come in and say, "Hey, I just need this, and then I'll be okay." A lot of times employers are happy to provide that. As someone who is an employer, like I know how hard it is to get good staff, and I will work hard to make my staff be successful. Like if they're not successful, I can't do my job. My customers can't get the experience they want. Like that is the whole goal, and I'm happy to work with people. But it's hard if people can't communicate their needs because when you have a lot of different people with a lot of different needs, you can't just guess them all.
No, that's such a good point. And again, that's like such a hard part of the hearing loss journey to navigate sometimes and to find your voice. And it does take a few years. And like you said, you went to that workshop and they said maybe you need to change careers and it's not an option for everyone, but it is something maybe you do have to consider if there's things that you're not willing to negotiate in your own life or like figure out. So that's a really good point that you brought up. And I love too that you say like you wear your hair up to show off your bone anchored hearing aid. And I think like that's what we need to do in society more is just to be more proud of our devices. Like that is how we will change like the way people view it. And I wear my hair up all the time. My daughter's 2.5. So if I wear it down, it's not going to stay nice for long. But like I love showing them off and I encourage people to ask me questions. Not everyone's cup of tea, but that's that's where I see we making the biggest change. And that's awesome. And it warms my ear to hear those stories when teenagers are struggling and then you make a difference like that. That's just so beautiful. Um, so I also wanted to ask you, what are some tips that you have found over the years that have worked for you when you're dealing with your single-sided deafness? And like you said, everyone's is different, but maybe some of the things that work for you can help other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I feel like it's hard to condense it all because I have like so many things. But I will do my best. Um, really small thing, but make sure your devices are set to mono instead of stereo when you're
Oh,
putting in earbuds or anything like that, because all of a sudden, like half of the music you aren't hearing because it's on the other side.
interesting. Okay.
And that's an easy one to miss, like to just not like go into your settings and set that up. Yeah, so there's a lot of different like technology. I do enjoy looking for technology solutions. One thing that's been big for me is I sometimes struggle with anxiety for I'm not going to hear something, which I think is super common in the hearing loss experience. And especially like if my husband is away from home, I have literally slept through a fire alarm once when it went off falsely, thankfully. But when I slept through it, I was like, okay, so that's like a wake up call. This is important. So I have Android phone. I'm an Android user, and I really love some of the features that are built right into Android that help with hearing loss. One of them is you can have sound notifications on, and it will listen for fire alarms or doorbells or babies crying or water running. And then I have it vibrate my smartwatch so that it will wake me up if those things occur, which really gives me a better sense of security. In general, I love having a smartwatch to wake me up and like all the various things that you need because I got really good at sleeping through my alarm if I slept on my hearing ear. So those types of things can be really beneficial. I also really love the AirPods Pro 2 hearing aid feature. Uh, so a lot of times folks with single-sided deafness don't think that they're going to be beneficial to them. And I just have to say the AirPods have the absolute best background noise canceling I have ever encountered in any over-the-counter technological product. And for people with single-sided deafness, background noise is like what our big problem tends to be. And so it's amazing because I will put those in when I go to like a loud, noisy restaurant, and I will actually be able to understand my conversational partner because it's got directional mics and, like I said, a really amazing background noise cancellation. It really does a good job of bringing out what you want to hear and removing the rest. It's also nice because a lot of times people with hearing loss have sound sensitivity, and those loud restaurants can, you walk in and you just feel like you're getting hit with sound. And I will put those in and I'll be like, oh, I just feel my shoulders go down and like I can relax and it's not so hard. So that's been another recent development that I really love. And it's fun because I have a bone anchored hearing aid, so I can wear my hearing aid and the AirPods at the same time. And I'm like, feel like I get the best of all worlds, which is really fun. I do just want to mention too, sometimes people who are diagnosed with single-sided deafness are told by their doctors that there's nothing that they can do for their hearing loss. And I just want to say that is false. If you are single-sided deaf, typically your options are cross hearing aids, bone-anchored hearing aids, or possibly a cochlear implant, depending on the reason for your hearing loss. So if anyone's told you that, that's not true. You have options. I just want to make sure to share that. Um, Otherwise, with single-sided deafness, a lot of the tips and tricks and things that I've found are environmental and like body positioning and things like that, like making sure you're paying attention to your options. If I'm gonna pick a restaurant with friends, I'm gonna go on Google and I'm gonna image search it and I'm gonna look at, does it have high ceilings? Because high ceilings are terrible. Does it have exposed metal? That's terrible. Does it have dim lights? That's terrible. You know, like, and if I can find a nice 1970s supper club with carpet everywhere, I'm like, all right, that's where we're going. So, like, to pay attention to those sorts of things and like put some planning into things, you know, if you're going to attend a class or a conference, like to make sure you're positioned on the side where your hearing ear is towards the instructor, you know, towards the front, making sure there's good lighting, like those sorts of things can make a huge difference without, you know, taking a lot of things or having devices and things like that. I will say too, I'm a huge fan of things like hearing loops and remote microphones, but not everybody who has single-sided deafness decides to get actual hearing aid technology. But if you are looking into that, those are super wonderful options that make a huge difference too. And I think sometimes people with single-sided deafness will be like, well, I can hear well enough, but they don't take into account the fatigue. And the fatigue is really real and it really wears you down and leaves you with a lot less. And so if you're happy with your hearing and you're single-sided deaf, like that's fine. But if you're not happy, I really do recommend that you look into some options to assist you because I can do more and have a fuller life if I don't spend all my energy on just hearing. And
Yeah.
I think that that's just a really important thing to keep in mind because I want to be able to, you know, do more things and not just be done in because of my hearing. And obviously, nothing, you know, in the hearing loss world, as far as devices or things, takes you back to zero, right? It's not like putting on glasses and all of a sudden you're 20/20. But I have the stats on my bone anchored hearing aid. And when I did like a speech and noise test, I could hear 60% word recognition with the one ear, right? And then when I had my hearing aid with my hearing ear testing my word recognition for speech and noise, it was 83%, right? Like that's a huge difference. I went from having essentially one working ear to like one and a half ears. And like that's so much better than just one. And so I just really recommend that you look into options because that hearing fatigue will really get you. And sometimes people are like, well, I can do it. But like, do you have to do it the hardest way? Like, you deserve to not have to strain all the time. And
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
the big thing.
Yeah, I think that's like part of the hearing loss journey and like the grieving process too, almost like you're kind of in denial a little bit. Like, I can hear well enough. Like, that happened to me because my hearing loss started on one side and now my ears are both moderate to severe. And I was in that denial phase. Like, I wouldn't wear my hearing aid even though it would help me. Like, why don't I want to help myself? Because I was worried so much about what other people thought. But at the end of the day, they're not actually thinking about me. I'm just thinking they're thinking about me, you know? So when I finally like realized, hey, my hearing aid is helping me so much. What am I doing? But it's just all about that process and cycle. And I think that's why like what you're doing is so important is like letting people know that, hey, these are your options. Why not try them? Because like if I can make your life a little bit better, or this can make your life even 10% better, that's quite the difference when it comes to your hearing. Like, if you really think about it, like you said, you went from 90 to 100, and that change was really drastic. So imagine going back the other way, gaining that 10% back. Like, you really never know.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm curious, so you advocate a lot online, you have your blog and your different things. At what point in your hearing loss journey did you begin to do that? Like, was that right away, or was it something you kind of grew into and realized it just felt like the right path for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I started volunteering. I really should look this up because I don't remember precisely, but I want to say about like between a year to 2 years after my treatment, I started volunteering with the Acoustic Neuroma Association. And in a smaller capacity, but kind of what's driven me from the very beginning is like I would identify a lack and I would be like, this doesn't exist and I really want it to. And so I'm just going to do it. Because what kind of spurred me on to start with is I had had one child before I had my brain surgery. And I was thinking about being pregnant again. And I was very nervous as to what that would look like after a brain surgery and what I needed to worry about and those sorts of things. And I couldn't find that. I couldn't connect with somebody else who had been in that situation. And I really wanted to find other young people. I went to a support group meeting that was based on geography. And for me, it was like almost a 3 hour drive. It was not simple because acoustic neuromas are not like super common. So we're fairly spread out. And I live in a rural area anyway. So I went to this support group and it was almost all older adults because it is more common to have this diagnosis like middle to older age. And so they're all going around sharing stories and they're talking about how they just retired when they got their diagnosis. And I'm like, well, that sounds like a good solution for you, but it doesn't apply to my life. And so I really wanted to connect with other people who are at a similar life stage as me. So I started small with the Acoustic Neuroma Association and it just kind of kept growing. And I'd be like, okay, but like also this and like also, and so it became this whole thing. And then as far as like the blogging and the writing and stuff, it's just kind of funny because I never really thought of myself as a writer or like wanted to be that person. But I was running these support groups and talking to all these people and supporting them. And I kept hearing the same refrain over and over again that like young folks who had this brain tumor were really unhappy with their hearing, but they didn't feel like they could get hearing devices because of the stigma. And also because of other barriers. And there are a lot of barriers to hearing devices, cost, travel, insurance. I mean, it's ridiculous how hard it is, and it shouldn't be that hard. But stigma was a hugely limiting factor. And that really frustrated me that, there was things to help people that they weren't taking advantage of because they felt like they couldn't as a young person. And so that kind of fired me up, and I really wanted to do something about it. And so that whole process started almost 2 years ago that I like kind of got rolling on the blog and the more public, I guess, advocacy because I was like, this needs to change. It needs to be better. We need to fight this stigma. I want to do more. I want to support people. And So again, it was just identifying this issue that I wanted this to be better. I wanted it to change. And so I was going to do what I could to work on that. And that's actually something I really appreciate about your platform, April. I think you do a phenomenal job of fighting the stigma in a really fun and wonderful way. And I really think you're awesome for doing that.
Well, thank you so much. Well, it's funny because you mentioned how like writing wasn't like your thing, but you do the blogging. I was like that too, but that's why I make the videos. So I'm like, I'm doing more of like the video content versus the physical writing. But just it's amazing when people take like the diagnosis is like we have and turning it into advocacy because not everyone goes through that path, especially when we get the diagnosis in our 20s. Like I was 25, you said 27, and I think it's just a wild ride and it's amazing the like what we take from it and how we run with it. So I admire what you do too. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, I really felt like this was a horrible situation. And I wanted to take it and turn it into something useful. I wanted to take this bad experience and be like, this wasn't a waste. I didn't suffer needlessly. I went through this and now I'm using it to do something good in the world. Plus, like I said before, I don't mind doing the research and the legwork and figuring the things out. And if I spent all this time learning all of this, why make somebody else have to do that? Why not give them a shortcut and be like, here you go. Here's the information. You can get it at like an earlier and quicker time to help you out and make things easier for you. I really appreciate because with all of the brain tumor volunteering I do, I often have people tell me like this really made a big difference. Like you really helped me at a horrible moment and I feel amazing that I get to help people out at like the worst time in their life.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear that. And that's so powerful too. And it just shows like how much these resources are needed and these conversations are needed because it's a really isolating place, especially when you don't have a person to talk to. Like you maybe you can talk to a friend or your parent or whatever, but as much as they'll empathize with you, they don't understand fully what hearing loss is like or what the having the brain tumor is like. And it can be draining and the fatigue and all of these things. So it is so beautiful when you can find that support online and feel comfortable enough to talk to a complete stranger about your experience because it really does help. And that was why I started my channel too, is for myself to cope. But then I was like, wow, there's so many people that don't have support or have the outlet to share their ups and downs. So it's really powerful. And the more we can do this, the more people we can help. And I think that's absolutely wonderful.
Yes. No, I totally agree. The isolation is a real thing and feeling like nobody understands you is it's really hard. But I will just say I'm currently leading like an 8-week session based on a book called Becoming Hearing Empowered, which by the way I really recommend. And as we've been working on it and we've been talking about our hearing loss journeys, it was really interesting because we were talking about something positive in your life because of hearing loss. And many people all agreed that one of the big positives in their life because of hearing loss has been connecting to other people who had hearing loss. And I thought that was so beautiful because hearing loss is known for like isolating and lack of community and things like that. And that so many people are finding it as a way to meet other wonderful individuals. I'm like, that is beautiful. And that means that we are like doing the good work of creating these communities that we all need.
Yes, I agree. And like that's like one positive social media. Like sometimes I find this battle with, creating content online and sharing things like social media is very heavy sometimes and like a lot. But then I'm like, this is how we make those connections. And I wish there was a way that we could all meet in person. Like I'm hosting a meetup in Toronto, but not everyone is close or in Canada. And I'm like, the Hearing Loss Association of America, they also have their conferences and stuff. And I wish there was more we could do in person again and like be connected, but for the time being, at least we have the online space and we have social media and we have blogs and things, but that's amazing. That's really wonderful. And I do think that's the power of online. Like we get to connect and find people all over the world. I mean, I'm in Canada, you're in the States, so I mean, like, look at that.
Absolutely. It is amazing. There's never been a better time to have hearing loss. We have so many options to connect. And I will say, uh, going to the Hearing Loss Association of America's convention, I went last year for the first time. It was amazing to be in that space with all these other people who have hearing loss. I could not believe how phenomenal that was. And it was so cool too because people were so friendly and outgoing and like willing to just strike up conversations. And I thought that was so beautiful that people who often feel sidelined in social situations and uncomfortable, they were all being so bold and sharing and, oh, you know what? I tried this and that worked for me in that situation. It was I like get goosebumps talking about it. It was so beautiful. So if you have an opportunity like that, I would definitely recommend utilizing it because it is a really special experience.
I would love to go to that one day. That would be so incredible. And I wish we had more in-person like events like that in Canada, but it's not quite the same, I guess, market you could say. It's not quite on the level the US is in that department, but that is that's amazing. And so before we go, I do want to let people know who are watching this where they can connect with you, your website, your blog, and I'll make sure I include all of the details in the captions, but if you could just let us know.
Absolutely. Yeah. So my blog is luckybraintumor.com. And that's also my Instagram is Lucky Brain Tumor, and I'm on Facebook as Lucky Brain Tumor. I also really recommend if you do have an acoustic neuroma to connect with the Acoustic Neuroma Association, which is the anausa.org. But I'm happy for folks to reach out or connect. I'd love to share stories and hear your stories. And thank you so much for having me, April. This has been great.
That's amazing. That's a wonderful note to end on, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share your story, and I hope you have a great day.
You too.